Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Saturday morning show. Today, we are going to talk about cheap letting fees, and this is quite a hot topic for landlords and things, especially when you're picking an agent. And we're going to try and delve into the different parts of that today and look at. There's around about 15 hidden ways that that landlords could trip up in this decision-making process, and we're going to try and delve in as much as we can this morning in the time that we have to what they are and what's the things to look out for and the things to definitely avoid when you are choosing an agent, especially when it comes to the fees and not just thinking cheap fee, I'll go for that. Margins and things, Kerin, really do matter when you're a landlord and you're trying to keep an eye on your costs as well as the income. And it's an essential part of any successful business strategy. And your buy-to-let portfolio is definitely a business in itself. So you need to have that mindset and someone giving you that information and guiding you properly. And a good letting agent will do that, but you do have to pay for it. Now,
I think we've spoken about obviously how to find good tenants, but also finding a good agent is key as well. Like you say, those marginal differences can make a big change for a landlord. So making sure you're doing your due diligence in the agent that you're looking at and just making sure you understand as well what's all involved in the process that they do. So, there's a lot of things that we do that are behind the scenes that, landlords will probably never know that we're doing for them. But it is all the things that we are doing there. So it's making sure that you understand what your agent is going to be doing for you. Yeah.
And building your portfolio, and when you're looking at potential investments and things, when you do that investment purchase, factor in the cost of having your agent and a good agent and what their fees are in with that investment cost. And then that way you've already allowed for it. And if your investment changes throughout the years and costs change in terms of maybe mortgage rates and things, and you start to feel the pressure, then you've always got you've factored in the agent costs, and you can always take them out and self-manage if worst case scenario comes. But yeah, definitely factor it in at the beginning. Now, a lot of you landlords and things watching might be thinking, but what about the savings? What about trying to save? And margins are so important. But if you're saving the cost, now and not paying a good letting agent fee, and obviously just going for the cheapest, you may obviously feel the effects of that later on. Just buying cheap taps and appliances and things in the same aspect, inevitably, you're going to end up paying for replacements later on because they won't stand the test of time. So I think pay cheap, pay twice, or I think the saying goes. But anyway.
Yeah. Cheap is not always durable, as we find out.
Yeah, but the same thing when you're buying appliances or products at a cheaper rate and have to replace them quicker, cheap letting fees can equally backfire on you as well. So cheap fees are never sold as coming with a reduction as such in service or protection, and many of the hidden costs of bargain rates when it comes to letting agent fees and things only reveal themselves possibly when it's too late, to be honest. And for instance, these things usually, and this is what we're going to cover this morning, is that an inadequate tenancy setup, things not being set up right from the get-go, is just a no-no. Flawed rental contracts. Now, I know here in Scotland we have the private residential tenancy, and that is the template that we use. You can add and take away certain things, but the basis of that is the template issued by the Scottish Government. So we are governed by that here in Scotland, but in England that's a lot different, in Wales as well. And there could be a lot of flaws in rental contracts. Before the private residential tenancy, I've seen some scary tenancy agreements that are just one page. So yeah. Small print surprises as well, and agreements and things. You always make sure that you've read through and understand what responsibilities of you as a landlord and your agent have. So yeah, small print is very important. And that lacks legal compliance as well. We're going to talk about that today. And then the biggie, Kerin, is we're going to talk about communication and substandard communication. Is so important, communication. If there's anything I've learned over the years, is that communication with your landlord as an agent, whether it's good or whether it's bad, as long as it's communication, it has to be done. And it's something that could really break down a relationship if not followed through with correctly. So that's the thing we're going to wrap up on today. But your choice of letting agent will have an effect on your property's legal and financial well-being. So we're going to run through these tips today and see if we could help you spot those rental red flags before you make any decisions. And we're going to kick off.
One of the first things
we're going to kick off, Kim, with an adequate tenancy setup.
Yes, so obviously tenancy setup a key here for it. So unfortunately, cheap letting fees can involve corner cutting from before the tenancy even begins, with far-reaching consequences that dwarf your supposed savings for it. So I mean, ultimately, landlords are here to try and make money, provide that housing aspect as well for a lot of people. You want to be seeing the money coming in, and by not setting your tenancy up in the right place, it can create that downfall. So some of the things to watch out for are obviously your initial process when you're doing your credit and ID checks. That isn't always enough. So it's vital to get to work and confirm your salary confirmation, landlord references, preferably followed up by a phone call. We see this sometimes, and we do our due diligence when we're requesting landlord references. And one of the things I would advise you do is check it against landlord registration. If it's coming from an agent, it's not as likely to be a friend, for example. It's just had their email address put down. But if it is a private landlord, then landlord registration is where you can check and make sure that name matches up to the actual registered landlord that is on the system for it, as opposed to somebody maybe trying to pull a fly one and just putting somebody else down as their reference. But 3 or more bank statements as well is obviously advisable, making sure that you are doing your due diligence when it comes to somebody's finances. That credit check, they might not have adverse credit, but it doesn't always mean to say that they're maybe not managing their money in the best way there.
Yeah.
Now, another one is, we have seen a big change in this over the years, is your inventories. So a 2-page written inventory with no photos or videos to corroborate the text won't have any length or detail that you need to stand up with a winning dispute. So, I mean, we've touched on this many times. The inventory is a key thing.
We'll talk about it a wee bit, but we do always cover it. I mean, for those that have not caught other shows that we do, I mean, inventories and deposits and things are such a tricky subject. If they're not done right, if you do it right, it could be quite straightforward. But if not, you could fall right down a rabbit hole with a deposit reclaim, especially if you're trying to reclaim and you don't have the right evidence. You've got an inventory, but it's not got enough information in it. It's not comprehensive enough. It's no photos. You've not used the right terminology. There's just so many things.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen some attempts at ones over time, and it's just, I mean, fair play to a landlord, they've tried, but it's not what's going to stand up. Like we say, if we do go to a deposit dispute, we need an adequate inventory for it. So obviously you get software out there, you can get apps to download that will also like help you guide yourself through if you are doing it on your own, or there are inventory clerks out there as well that do this as their professional job. And we can see, I mean, it's easily a 50-page document for a 2-bedroom unfurnished property. So you can see the detail just even from that goes into it. So definitely worthwhile getting a proper one done.
Our inventory clerk is really good. He actually tests all the smoke detectors, makes sure the carbon monoxide detector's working, reads the meters. Do you know, there's quite a lot involved.
Making sure the smoke alarms are in date as well. So just all those initial checks. But realistically, these days, if you don't have an inventory, you don't have a claim against the deposit anymore. Unless it's for rent arrears, you can obviously prove that elsewhere. But if it's anything, cleaning, damages, even garden, anything like that, you need an inventory for it now. So very highly advised. And if you don't have one, or your agent's maybe not advised you to get one done in the first place, that can be a big outlay at the end of it, because you don't have that safety net there that if your tenant does leave and there are things needing addressed that are maybe going to either need claimed against the deposit or supersede the deposit, you don't have much of a claim there without one. So again, that is definitely something that will make sure that you're keeping yourself right by getting it done.
Yeah, and the thing about inventories and condition reports and etc., they're not mandatory, so you don't need to do one. But it's entirely up to your own peril, I think. And if you've not got an agent who is aware of the pitfalls of not having one and advising you to ideally have one, do you know, that, like you say, Kim, that could cost you a lot in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And as you said as well, obviously some of the tenancy agreements that we've had have been very questionable, but the off-the-shelf template tenancy agreements that aren't tailored to the specifics of your property invite multiple problems for later on. So we do have more details on that in our next section. And you can also take a wee look at our religious referencing blog. our rigorous referencing blog, getting all tongue-tied there, and that'll give you some more information if you do want some further details on just the things that we've covered there as well. You'll get that in further detail, but definitely asking every agent to explain their tenancy setup process and their timeline to see if it has any holes that might make you vulnerable is a key point there. So making sure that your agent is going to be doing all these aspects for you and making sure that they're covering you, or if you're a landlord yourself as well, just making sure that you are taking these necessary steps to keep yourself right.
Yeah, the rigorous referencing blog. the link to that is attached to this post. So if you click into that, guys, it'll take you into the blog and the actual show and things as well, or you could listen to the podcast. But there's a lot of good information there about doing the referencing process as best you can at the beginning to safeguard yourself. So there's a lot of information in that. You did touch on the tenancy agreements there, Kerin, and you did say obviously the off-the-shelf tenancy agreements can be really they could be one page, but that's obviously England and Wales now. Obviously Scotland have the private residential tenancy template that we work from. You can't add additional clauses and things into the PRT in Scotland and different things, but generally it's the basis of what has been issued by the government, and that's what we have to use now. So and that brings us to flawed rental contracts, and this will probably be a lot more relevant to obviously people in England and Wales. But the tenancy agreement for your rental property, it really needs to be legally watertight and really finely tuned to your property. But cheap letting fees with generic, and people that come and these agents that come with, and like I say, south of the border, where they have just generic templates that they issue, will typically shortfall where they actually need to be. And it could be anything from like failures to clarify what the actual tenant's responsibilities are. That could be anything from, you're expected to defrost the fridge and freezer. You're expected to replace the filters in the cooker hood and clear the drains. And just all these different things that will need to be rectified at the end, possibly, or by the tenant. But if you've not stipulated or outlined that in the tenancy agreement, then how are you going to hold them to be able to do these things? Cleaning carpets and things as well. If there's no specific clauses around expected maintenance for your tenants, indeed like outdoors and the garden areas and terraces and their responsibility to mow the lawn and clean patio areas and things as well, if that's not in there, then you can't enforce that to them. And having that lack of a necessary extra clause for tenants possibly with children or pets, for the continuous wear and tear that might come from a family unit staying in there as opposed to maybe a couple, or having one or two dogs or a dog and a cat, having pets basically. You're going to have things like scuffs and whatever, and different levels of wear and tear in a property, possibly even chew marks and crayon marks at walls, and these are the things that happen. But if you've not got all that outlined in your tenancy agreement for the responsibility of the tenant to rectify these things, then it's quite difficult. So having those kind of flaws in your rental contract can be quite detrimental to you at the end. A top tip, I think, is ask your agent when you're speaking to them for an example of what their tenancy agreement is. Now, we have, like I say, the PRT here in Scotland, we have our own version of that, but like I say, the basis of it is the template. But we've added a few things in there and things as well, but always ask to see it. Even if you are here in Scotland, ask to see a copy of the tenancy agreement that your agent will be using, because you might be very surprised they might not even produce a PRT, which I would be very concerned if somebody did, but you never know. Always ask to see what kind of contract they're going to be using for your tenant to sign. And a correctly drafted contract can save you thousands of pounds if you hit a dispute at the end of the tenancy. So contract's so important. And also things like the making sure the attention to detail in terms of, do they actually have the names of the people spelt correctly and things on that as well, because that is something, if you ever got to dispute and you were in the process of trying to regain possession through tribunal services and things, if you've got their name spelled incorrectly, then that's just a big problem when you come, because they could actually contest that and say, well, who's that? That's not me. And that sounds ludicrous, but it could happen. And I know it's happened in years previous, not to us, but I've heard stories. and it could cause a lot of problems. So just, flaws in your rental contract, attention to detail, even the simplest things is the spelling of the actual tenant's name and things as well. So always ask to see a copy of what your agent will be using for your tenancy.
Yeah, and like you say, it can be altered between, obviously there's one that the Scottish Government issues, but I mean different agents that will have kind of tweaked it to suit themselves or kind of adapt it to their company to make it look a bit more maybe professional and adapted. So, and there, like you say, there might be different clauses in there that can differ them. So making sure, so making sure that you know what's involved in the one that your tenant's going to be signing there, just so you're covered, as you say, to the best of your knowledge as well, and getting the spelling right.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. What about the small print then, Kerin, and surprises and the small print if you don't read it?
So it can very much lead to some surprises. So many landlords get caught off guard when their cheap letting fees turn out to exclude services that they thought were standard or that come at additional costs provided to them. So common culprits are maintenance and repairs. We lose count of how often we hear agents charging extra on top of their maintenance fee if they need to arrange maintenance or repairs. So again, that's something just to keep in mind. Obviously, if you've got access to an agent's contractors, there may be some extra charges on top of there that you might be encouraged just for obviously them making the arrangements for it or kickbacks on top of it. So there's different things that can be involved there. So speaking to your agent and having an understanding of what you're going to be paying for is important there as well.
Yeah.
Another one, and this is one that I see quite a bit with other agents, is mid-tenancy inspections. So quite often a landlord can think they're included in part of their service, but they may not always be. So making sure that you know for that as well. Same with obviously like end of tenancy inspections as well. I've heard of some agents that charge quite a high amount for going and doing it, like an exit inspection. So knowing what you're going to be charged for in surplus to your maintenance fees. But imagine employing an agent to manage your property and then finding out you need to pay them more on top of that just to check up on it. Obviously, it can be a bit of a surprise there, and depending on how often it gets done, how regular the inspections are as well, it can all amount up.
I think in general, inspections and since the whole lockdown thing and access and everything, things did change, and inspections aren't as regular with a lot of agents. I think that they've not become laxed. I would say it's just a wee bit more of a reasonable time frame, and I think 6 months is probably the ideal situation there. But when tenants first move in, I think it's always good to try and catch them at that first 3 month point, just to make sure that they've moved in, things are going well. And it's so interesting. I bring that up because I spoke to a landlord just the other day that I met with for the first time, and they had used other people and things in the past. And a strange thing they had said to me was that 3 days into one of the previous tenancies they had in that property, the landlord had the landlord's agent was on site for whatever reason, and they had reported back like, I've been in, everything looks fine, blah blah blah. We'll check again in 6 months or whatever. And the landlord was like, but that's only 3 days in. God, they'll not even have their stuff out the boxes yet. And I'm like, no. I said, I think ideally you try and get in at that 3 month point because they've moved in, they're settled, and you could gauge really well how they're living in the property. And then from that point onwards, you can maybe space it out a wee bit more. Ideally, try and do every 3 months for the first year. It's not always possible. It's quite a lot intermittently for the first year. But if you get past that first year and you've got a few inspections where you could see the tenant is looking after the place, then generally it's fine to kind of reserve back to that 6 month point.
I think that, like you say, that 3 months is a good initial point to go in and check in, because as you say, they're a bit more settled, and it does give you a better stance as to how often the inspections are going to have to be, whether it is going to have to be keeping on top of them every 3 months or whether the 6 months is a bit more adequate for it. But like we say, you can always, if you are at that 6 month point, but you start to get concerns over the tenants, you can look to go back to doing it every 3 months just to keep on top of it. I mean, I know when I was doing them, we have tenants that are great and things wouldn't change. And if there was any issues, they would let us know, and I'd go in every 3 months and I was like, why am I here? Because they were great. And it was just going in for a catch up really. And we would still do all the checks, but it just, obviously time goes so fast and you don't realize it. And it does just seem like a few weeks ago that you were there really, but it does give you that chance as well to kind of build up that relationship with your tenants, whether you're an agent or a landlord as well. So it does mean that if things maybe go wrong, you've got a bit more of a personal rapport with them as well. You're not just somebody at the end of a phone, you are this person that's been out and built up a relationship with them, rather than just somebody that they can phone at down the phone when things go wrong. But you're that person there, and they realise as well, I think you're there to help them. Not a lot of tenants do realise that, but ultimately that's what an agent is there for, is to help your tenants and help your landlords as well through the process of letting properties.
Yeah, as an agent, if you've got a good relationship with your tenant, it just puts you at such an advantage, rather than having a fractious, maybe like a relationship where your tenant won't pick up the phone to you and things. That's just no good. That can cause a lot of
we've seen it time and time. Like some tenants, if they get into maybe financial difficulty, they'll bury their head in the sand. And again, it's nothing to do with an agent; it's just maybe who they are. But when you've got that relationship, it does make it easier to go and approach them and try and get things turned around before it gets to a point where there isn't coming back from it.
Yeah, definitely.
But another thing to watch out for is income and performance reviews. So you'd think that managing your property would include tips on maintaining and improving your profitability, getting all tongue-tied today, but sadly that's not always the case. So there's different ways in which obviously throughout a tenancy you can still look to maximise your rental value, for example, by doing rent increases. That even small incremental increases over years can obviously amount up. And it saves you then having to get to a point where maybe your mortgage rate's increased. You're going to have a big jump between the mortgage rate and obviously the rental value that's coming in. So you're going to have to increase your tenant's rent. Whereas if you've done small incremental increases over time, it wouldn't be as much of a jump for your tenant. But now maybe you're going to have to do it. So having an agent that'll discuss these things with you and help you figure out a good value for it as well. Obviously, we have some landlords and it's just the jump that they want to do is maybe a little bit steep. And it's not advisable for their tenants. It's possibly going to push out what could be a really good tenant there, and just make it so when it does come around to remarket, you've maybe even pushed it to the point where it's above market value. So you're not going to get somebody at that same level again. So making sure you're getting somebody that is going to have those realistic conversations with you as well, but how to maximize it, but do it in a way that's going to benefit you and also keep your tenant in place.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Karen. And I think, like you say, kind of stressing off the small incremental changes over time is so much more important and easier to roll out to tenants, rather than this big jump all of a sudden. And I think, if anything, in the change in legislation and things rolled out by the Scottish Government over the last few years, if that's taught us anything, is to do that, because a lot of people for so many years had their rent levels at the same level and never changed. And then we went through this whole process and they got to the other end with changing legislation and, as you say, interest rates and things going up. And people are like, I can't afford to do this unless I have my rent at this level. And it's like, okay, but that's like 100 or 100 odd pounds more than what your tenant's paying now. How could you expect somebody just to jump that and have that additional payment each month? It's quite a lot to expect somebody to do that.
Yeah, and it can put a lot of strain on a tenant as well. And like we say, if we've got good tenants, we want to keep them. We don't want them moving out. So, and again, for a landlord, for what it would be to put the rent up, they might end up having to pay for a whole new tenancy to go in there. So it's really, is it going to work in your favour, doing a big increase that a tenant's not going to afford and push them out? Because ultimately you could end up out of pocket for it. Whereas if you maybe just took some advice and obviously worked out something that suited both of you, in terms of the landlord and the tenant, then you could have saved yourself having to relet the property again.
Yeah, because it's not just the reletting fee cost. You possibly might have to give it a spruce up and do some general repairs and things that wouldn't really necessarily need done because the tenant's in there. But to actually put it back on the market and relet it, there's things that you probably have to do. So you would have all that cost incurred, which would really offset any increase that you were planning to do previously. So yeah, I think to be reasonable and find a common ground where you both are happy. And a good agent will do that for you.
Yeah, and even for the shortest turnaround time as well, you're still going to be looking at some sort of void period where you're going to be without rent regardless. So there's different ways to maximise your property, but listening to the right agent will help you do it in the right way as well. But our advice is obviously scrutinise the agency agreement in detail. If the agent's built on the illusion that they've cheap fees there, but you will really have that scrutiny shift in there, and you could possibly be facing quite a lot of extra costs as well. So if you do have an agent there, as we say, that's posting these cheaper fees, that seems great, look at the finer detail of it. I mean, I know well, not name anybody, but I know there's agents out there that do have a cheaper management fee, for example. But I'm also aware of, when after speaking to like landlords that have been with them, that they have all these extra costs. So realistically, you're probably going to end up paying more than you would if you just went for an agent that maybe covers more services within that management fee for it, rather than having to pay for exit inspections and all these additional things that they do have there for it that you might not know about until the time comes around and you're hit with the bill for it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I mean about small print and hidden costs and things. Check that there isn't, and like you say, scrutinise an agency's agreement and ask questions.
Yes, ultimately you wouldn't be saving, you would be subsidising. So making sure that you are doing it correctly, getting the right fees for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of good points on that there, and asking questions is just the best way to eliminate that as best you can at the initial stages of appointing an agent. So we're going to move on and talk about the legal compliance, or particularly the lacks in legal compliance. Now, I don't need to tell you how much lettings law, or I probably don't need to tell you, anybody watching, how much lettings law has changed. It's changed drastically in the last few years, especially. And probably what people expect, the whole point of an agent is, or a managing agent, is to take the complexities of staying legally compliant entirely off your hands as a landlord. And ideally, that's what an agent will do, because they'll make sure that everything is in place and compliant, and they'll take care of renewals and things as well. Sadly, that is not always the case. And some of the tales that we've heard over the years from landlords switching from other agents and things, and I'm not here to discredit or talk about other agents. It's just that's the experience, that when people come to us, there's a lot of things that we do as par for the course that aren't really in that same, obviously, process with other agents. Protecting the deposit is something, protecting it too late is a big one, and that could come with a hefty fine, a monetary fine from if your tenant picks up on that and it's not been registered in time, they could pursue you, and I think it's up to 3 months of the deposit amount.
Yeah, so it's quite a hefty fine that you can get if you've not done it right.
I mean, don't quote me on that. I think it's about 3 months. Doing that late or not even at all. I've heard of stories in the past where none of the deposits were banked, and funnily enough, they disappeared. But anyway, that's a different story. But that really does leave you at risk of repayment orders, like I say, and it's up to 3 months of the deposit amount, like I said. But not to mention problems regaining actual possession of your property as well. If there's things not put in place in the first place, and you've not been seen to be complying with the legislation, then it can make it quite difficult to regain possession, because how could you then lawfully put through a notice to regain possession when you've not been upholding your side of the deal, basically, as the landlord or the agent? And that's a really important thing as well, because when you need to regain possession, you need to make sure you've got everything in place and correct. And if you appoint an agent to do that, they have got a responsibility to make sure they're doing that on your behalf. So that's a really important thing. Failing to supply safety certificates to a tenant before the tenancy starts is another thing as well. This exposes you to fines. They could range anywhere from £6,000 per certificate, and even a block on serving notice as well. So if you've not issued gas safety, electrical safety, all these proper things, and then, like I say, you trying to serve notice on the tenant, they could say no, because how could you do that now, because you've not been upholding your side of the deal from a legal standpoint. So it's really important. I mean, safety certificates are paramount, especially here in Scotland. I mean, if you're an agent operating in Scotland, you'll be registered and have your letting agent registration, which comes with a lot of training and learning and things as well. So you should know this. It should be second nature to you. And things like gas safety and that, it should be right up there, and the fire and smoke alarms and things as well. In addition to...
When it comes to the safety certificates, obviously, like you say, issuing them at the start of the tenancy, but we always issue them in a paper copy when we're doing the move-in, so the tenant has them. But prior to that, they also get that sent out to them in their move-in pack in an email. So at the end, if there is any disputes throughout your tenancy, you quite clearly have that email there that has them as the attachment there. So you can say, because obviously it can be quite hard to prove that it could be your word against the tenants that they got them at the physical move-in. But if you have that email copy of it showing that it's been sent to them, there's really no dispute there. So making sure you do have a record that they have been received as well by your tenants, or that you have sent them in an email, just to back up that paper side of it as well, can really benefit you if there is any disputes down the line for it. But also making sure that you set your reminders for your renewals for it as well. So that can be making sure they're all up to date with your certificates.
I mean, technology is great, and as over the years, as we've obviously progressed into digital, we do digital signatures on the tenancy agreements and things. So that's all done just prior to the tenancy, along with copies of the certificates and things, like you say, in email format and things. But we still obviously meet the tenant on the day, let them into the property, make sure they know how to work the boiler and things, and they get a hard copy, a paper copy in their move-in pack still. And I think that just reinforces I know there's a lot of agents in this day and age who do it all digital, and that's fine. But I think maybe it's me, maybe I'm getting too old, but I like to do the hard copy and paper copy as well. But
it's good as well, just for reiterating your process as well. Obviously, when we were doing it, we're explaining our property management process to a tenant, so they have that point of contact throughout their tenancy. They don't always listen, despite the fact that it is emailed to them in a paper form and discussed with them. But you still have all those details there as well. So they do have all the information for that process. So if there are any issues, they know who to contact and they know the process for them as well. And just even for setting out the expectations from a tenant, making sure that they're informed that they need to set up their gas, electric, council tax, and that the fact that you will be doing inspections of the property as well is something I always highlight to them when we're doing the move-in, just to let them know we'll be in contact with them at some point to arrange that, usually about the 3-month point. And just as well about their tenancy, that if they would want to end at any point, it is 28 days notice that they have to give us, and reiterate it has to be in writing. So it's good for having those key aspects there as well. So not only you're providing them with the safety certificates they need, you're providing them with all the information that they're going to need for the tenancy as well. So hopefully when you leave them, everything runs nice and smoothly from there. And like you say, show them how to work the boiler, heaters, whatever kind of heating's in the property, and just the general ins and outs of it as well.
It's just so important to kind of outline and reinforce the tenant's responsibilities and what they should be considering themselves accountable for. And then, like you say, how to get in contact with your agent out of hours and things as well. And if you've got it in email form and you've given them a move-in pack, whether it's in their kitchen drawer or whether it's on their phone in their emails, they've got access to that. Cover all bases.
And it's knowing what your agent's going to be offering your tenant as well, because ultimately it is your tenant that's in the property. So making sure that you know how they're going to be looked after and how your property is going to be looked after as well. Like we say, we have an out-of-hours emergency service and it's in-house. So is your tenant going to be calling up a call centre in Glasgow, somewhere else in the country, or are they going to be phoning your local agency? It's good to know these things. So obviously we have it. Gosh, Richard, how late have you been out at night at some properties?
Some ridiculous times over the years, but but I've done it,
So the importance of having that local agent and that in-house service as well for a landlord, because that can save you money. Like you say, you were out one time at a ridiculous time of night and again, we had tradesmen out trying to fix a roof at one point when we had a storm going on at like midnight. So it's making sure that you have known what your agent services can provide you with and how they're going to look after your property, rather than, like I say, a call centre through in Glasgow that you're just another address on a screen to.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've done a few after 12 over the years. And also, we've also had, our contractors have been out on Christmas Day. It was an emergency situation, so it had to be. But just obviously, to know the expectation that you've got, like, this is what my agent and the contractors are going to be doing for me. Definitely. Just so that everybody's on the same page, I think, is really important. And that's another thing about the kind of lax and compliance and things. When you're not addressing repairs when they're reported and allowing the property or homes to kind of deteriorate and fall short of legal living standards and things as well, is a really important thing that you need to. Any report of repairs and things needs to be nipped in the bud straight away, especially things when you've got things like water ingress and external repairs, which could have a detrimental effect to the internals over time if they've left. And more so like on the repercussions if that on that and like the you know, if you, like I say, if you go to then try and regain possession again, if you've not been upholding your side of the bargain as the landlord or the agent, and the property is substandard, you're going to struggle to regain possession of that, because they could fight the point that you've not been upholding your responsibility as an agent or a landlord. And we'll cover a bit more about that in the next section, because it is all about communication is a really important part in that as well, and falling short of not picking up repairs and dealing with them correctly.
Yeah, so as you see,
I was just going to say, to round up on that, but I mean, I think my tip is to have a check of your agent's website. Do you know, if you're looking at an agent, look at their website. Do you know, look for their memberships and things like client money protection. I think we just renewed ours last month. Are they a member of the client membership for the client money protection scheme? And if they don't have that badge somewhere, then do you know, it should be there somewhere. And then that could leave you open for a fine as well. Or them for a fine as your agent. So if they're not protecting themselves, then what does that say about how they're going to protect you as a landlord? So lax in compliance is a big concern if you can pick up signs at the early stages that that's not being followed through by them as an agent. And inexperienced agents, you will find that.
Yeah, they should be there to protect you and keep you compliant. That is one of the key things there. So making sure that they're doing that is so important, because you don't want to end up with any fines because things have not been done, when ultimately they could have been an easy fix in the first place.
Yeah. So I said we're going to, in the next bit, we're going to round up about communication, Kerin. I'll let you kick off, because it is really important. It's one of the most important key elements of being a letting agent.
So we obviously really enjoy updating our landlords and clients to keep them in the loop, but it never fails to amaze us how some agents just they specialise in avoiding that contact. So, I mean, for ourselves anyway, like myself, when we've got our properties on the market, we usually update our landlords every week as to how their property's got on. And even if that is a case of, look, there's not been any viewings this week, it's been a bit quieter this week, they still get that update. And then obviously if we have a tenant in between, great, we can go to them with that, but they are at minimum still getting that update every single week for it. And even if it is a case of when you've got a tenant in place and you've got your property managing agents in there dealing with things, even if it is just, look, I've instructed the contractor, they'll be in contact with you. Just, it makes things so much easier when ultimately you can be in the background doing all this work, but unless you let either the landlord or the tenant know, they're not going to know what you've been up to.
Yeah.
But we've met plenty of landlords who have had no idea that their tenant was reporting problems to the managing agent and getting absolutely no response. I mean, that is one of the classic ones you see. I've reported this and nothing's been done about it. And tenants like to say that too, when sometimes they haven't reported things. So making sure as well that things are followed up in writing is an important one there, because if there is any fallback, or a tenant says that they've reported something they've not, or maybe it's not been addressed in the timescale that they'd wanted it to be, but you followed the right process for addressing it, having things in writing are going to be your fail-safe there. And ultimately, if you're managing a lot of properties as well, it's hard to keep all of that information in your head. So if you've got it written down somewhere, it's easy to refer back to. And likewise, if you end up off as well, another colleague can pick things up quite easily if you've got everything documented there. So as I say, landlords don't always know what we're doing in the background, but if you let them know, it keeps them in the loop. And you can see how much we've actually been doing for them. And in some cases, how much we've been protecting them.
An agent with a really good CRM system where they document and log phone calls, conversations, emails that are sent out, when they're sent out, what day, time, even when the people have been opening these and receiving them. And all that communication. And like you say, Kerin, if you've got several people within a management unit, then if one person's off, the other person could pull that up on the system and pick up exactly where they left and know what's been said and what's been done, and communicate and can pick up that communication with a landlord or a tenant or both and mediate that situation with all the information that they need. And it's all there on record. So if there is any dispute, like I wasn't told this or I wasn't sent this, it's all there documented on the timeline of the tenancy.
Yeah, so notes are key there for keeping agent right, landlord, tenant. But when faced with being ignored, tenants are more likely to leave sooner than they might have, creating more cost for the landlord and finding replacements. So like we say, if a tenant thinks that they're not getting anywhere, they're not going to want to stay in the property as much, or it can make them more difficult as well because they are frustrated by the situation, whereas maybe a simple email, call, text, just some communication could have resolved the issue for it.
Yeah. What about, like, obviously we spoke about repairs and things. I mean, if repairs are basically ignored, I mean, how could that impact the property, the tenancy, the landlord?
So obviously, the longer they're ignored, the worse they can be to get fixed. And guess who pays for that? So ultimately, the bill is going to come back to a landlord, and perhaps with the extra maintenance supplement based on a percentage of the bill. So for example, if, like you say, if you've got water damage to a property and that's getting worse, it's going to be spreading, it's going to be covering a bigger area, it's going to be a bigger area that's going to have to be fixed. So which means bigger area, bigger bill. Whereas something could have just been addressed in the first place, it would have completely resolved it. I mean, ultimately, repairs need some time. You have to obviously take reasonable time to get things fixed. You've got contractors to get out, you've got quotes to put together, sometimes materials to get in, parts to get in place. So obviously a tenant does have to have a realistic expectation as to how long these things can take. However, a lack in management can cost the landlord more money than it would have in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. So then what's your tips then here about communication and things for a landlord, especially when they're considering an agent?
So best tip we can give is get each agent's service standards in writing for staying in touch and responding to problems. If they fall short of their written details, then you'll have more leverage to get out of your contract. So if you're in a situation that you're maybe not happy with, then you have the information there to be able to end your agreement and maybe find an agent that is going to work better for you.
Yeah, definitely. I think communication is key, and it's always been one of the most important things for me, and should be for any agent and managing agent when they are dealing with landlords and tenants, and especially people's portfolio. When people are putting a lot of money into building a portfolio as a business, a key factor is having an agent on your side who is acting in your best interest. And that does involve, obviously, following through on duty care for tenants, having really good communication, being really good at mediation skills, because mediating between landlord and tenant to make sure everything's quite the way it should be is just an invaluable skill, mediation.
And that's the thing, you could have a tenant. We get it firsthand sometimes when you do, and you get a tenant that comes in and they can be, when they feel like they're not getting anywhere, and they can be really riled up, and it's knowing kind of how to deal with that, and also setting out an action plan as well for like, how are we going to resolve this? So making sure that you do have that action plan, and again, putting it in writing is always something I would advise. So the tenant has maybe like a follow-up from that conversation, and also the landlord. So I mean, I had one last week and I spoke to the landlord about it, and we've got that action plan in place for how we're going to proceed with everything. But I still said to them, I'm going to follow up with you in an email. So they still had that all in writing of what we are going to be doing and how we're going to be resolving all of this. Mainly because it was obviously like financial things as well. So for an agent, even to protect yourself, it's good to have these things in writing to be like, so if there is any dispute, you can be like, look, this is what we agreed, this is what we've got in writing, here's the emails to back it up, basically. But again, setting that plan in place and keeping both the landlord and tenant informed is how we're going to get things resolved from there.
Yeah, I think when you say about obviously planning and setting a plan of things, it's like, and when you start down a road where you're dealing with maybe a big repair that's going to take a wee bit of time, and having that, setting an agenda at the beginning and making everybody involved aware, like, this is what's going to happen, this is when it's going to happen, and like an agenda and timeline, so that everybody knows, right, okay, this is getting done, this contractor's coming, it's going to be on this date, and it just keeps everybody in the loop, and everybody's confident, like, this is what's going to go ahead. Now, it might not always stick to that timeline and agenda, but at least you've initially set out a plan. So that is really important, definitely, Kim.
And that's the thing, we're always, as agents, we're at the mercy of contractors. It's when they can get out, and obviously who can get out, what jobs needing done for what contractor, and ultimately, like you say, things do change. It might not always stick to that initial timescale for it, but if it is going to change, then just obviously keeping both the tenant and the landlord up to date on that change of timescale for it. So it does make things more easily to manage, because you don't have to then be trying to fix maybe an issue with like in the property that's needing addressed, but also deal with maybe a frustrated tenant or a frustrated landlord. So just that simple communication can just keep things running a lot more smoothly.
Yeah, good communication can resolve a lot of the issues there. So yeah, thanks so much for joining in today, Kerin, and sharing all your knowledge and things with lettings and property management. And if anybody is an investor or landlord that's watching, and they might think, I mean, you might be thinking, my rental property does deserve a bit better. If you feel like you're not getting the right service, then you're right to question the value you're getting from your letting or management agent. And that emphasis should be focused on the value, the confidence, and the protection that you're getting from your agent. If you would like to reach out to myself or Kerin, we'd love to show you how we keep the best interests of landlords and investors and things at heart, and also with their rental property. And if you want to drop us a message in the comments here, I'll go back to the people that are commenting this morning. If we're on the rerun, I'll come back to comments in there as well. And you could also reach out to us direct on the social media channels, or indeed at our emails directly. We would be happy to answer any questions or discuss further anything that we've touched on in today's show.
Always happy to help.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Kerin. That was great. Thanks to everybody for watching. We'll leave it there this week, and we'll see you next time for the Saturday morning show.
See you later.
See you later.